And most companies report on is like these very minute metrics. We don't necessarily spend enough time talking about, are we keeping our customers happy? Are we giving them what I would call like the ideal customer outcome? We had to narrow all of our contracts down to a year. And we started to think about this philosophy of just like rip and replace. So we had to go in and say, like, if we were going to buy this AI tool, there was a over 50% chance that in 1 year's time, there would be something better in market that we had to replace it with.
Hey, Luke here. Just wanted to interrupt real quick to lay the groundwork for this conversation because it's a really interesting one. A lot of time in lifecycle marketing, we tend to report on the same metrics: daily active users, LTV, purchases. But what if there's a different metric that we should be looking at? One that's more indicative of monetization and in customer happiness. In this interview, I got to sit down with Krish Sailam, who's the former VP of MarTech at Nextdoor, where he spent nearly 5 years managing their entire marketing technology stack. He shared some really interesting learnings and perspectives from his time there, everything from how he evaluates new technology, how he thinks about lifecycle programs, and even where the future's headed with AI. I promise there's something in here for you.
Started off in marketing quite a while ago back in Boston. So my first job out of college was with an agency called Digitas. And back then we were helping AT&T really kind of get their online presence going. So we were building out like their first online customer service portal, some of their first banners ever, and really kind of helping define like what people should be doing online with some of these larger brands. From there, I have been around a variety of different areas of the ad tech and MarTech ecosystem and kind of gone through 3 major cycles. One is the transition to digital in the early 2000s, then sort of the transition to mobile in like the, early 10s. And at that point, I was with a mobile app development company and doing a lot of mobile advertising. And then that transitioned into kind of the data and AI space and, through programmatic. So I was doing a lot of work in the programmatic space across B2C brands and B2B. And then most recently, I was at Nextdoor, leading their MarTech side of things and their AI operations side, which is a new function we set up to kind of help with the adoption of AI.
Wow, that is, hefty background. I'm curious, those kind of 3 phases, that's very different going from kind of the mobile world even to the AI world. How do you think about that? What are some of the big changes you've seen in that?
The interesting thing is with all of those changes, there was a lot of unknowns. And, you had to kind of figure out, all right, what does this world look like? How are people going to adopt the technology? And then how do you really educate people? And I think that has stayed true in each of those major transitions. I think with AI, the biggest one is that people are still very curious as to like what they can do with the tools. So the education is not just around what the tool, how it works, but it's like, all right, what's the art of the possible with AI? And really kind of helping them understand a whole new way of approaching a process or approaching an outcome and adapting that to an AI platform. So I think it's going to be super interesting, and especially as we start to see new interfaces come out. So as like the glasses interfaces start to take root, maybe in a few months we might see an interface with no screen at all. So I think it'll be really interesting to see how people interact with these AI tools going forward.
I love that. The idea too of just different experiences moving forward for consumers is going to be really interesting. How important for a lot of these companies, one of the things we keep hearing over and over again, and you see it kind of everywhere, all over the news, LinkedIn, everyone's talking about AI and agents. But before you can even get to that point, there's a level of sophistication on the data architecture side. Would love to just pick your brain on that, what you've seen, how that is evolved, where you think it's going.
The definition of data architecture has evolved quite a bit over the past few years to really make the AI tools more powerful. If you look back at like the late teens and early 20s, data was just really about getting as many event signals about your customer as possible into like one place. And the big challenge over the past few years was kind of resolving that against one identity across many devices and many sessions and things like that. And that's where kind of CDPs, composable CDPs really helped quite a bit and unifying that identity. I think data going forward has several nuances in terms of the meaning. So one is, sort of the definition of Luke. So like who you are. the definition of what you did on your website or your app. And then the newer layer is what I would call like a semantic layer, or like what is being, heralded as like a knowledge graph. So understanding how all those interactions work together to really define like what you're trying to achieve and extracting meaning from that. So it's gone from just like raw data to kind of a true knowledge layer that has meaning and context. And when it goes into becoming context, then that starts to become actual like the fuel for a lot of the AI systems to make them more powerful, because now it can understand like, all right, this is what Luke is trying to do, and now I can give you kind of the next best action from there. So the context is like sort of the next variation of data if I take a stab at it.
In order to do that, though, it feels like the warehouse has got to play a pretty central role in that. I think there's going to come a point where people are going to want to do more than just look at it in a dashboard, which is how I got introduced to Hightouch and this whole idea of the composable CDP, in building the CDP around the warehouse rather than having kind of your own separate platform and just being locked into, whatever the events are the CDP has access to, versus all of those other data sources that are they're not available anywhere else outside of the data warehouse. Yeah, talk to me about kind of this new composable architecture that is sprung up.
Yeah, so I think the concept of a composable CDP makes a lot of sense because you're really centralizing most of your data collection, and then you're adding a layer of intelligence on top of it. But you're not really paying for all the data in another system, and I think that's a huge benefit to a lot of companies. So like, what you're paying for is like a brain and an engine at that point, and the ability to kind of get those signals to downstream platforms as needed. And like the easier the interface, the better. So I think there's definitely a lot of benefit to a composable CDP, and there's going to be companies that need like a regular CDP, and there's going to be companies that need a little bit of both. So I think they kind of play well together in some cases as well. I think the concept of like creating one central data store is really important, because when I first got to Nextdoor, like one of the big challenges we had to solve for was a lot of disparate data systems, and we had no way of kind of tying them together. We had no way of centralizing kind of the identity structure, and that really created a lot of technical debt. So the composable CDP really kind of gets ahead of that by saying, dump all your stuff in one place, and we'll sort of leverage data from there. I think where composable CDPs will start to get even more interesting is when they start to get like that intelligence layer and orchestration layer in them, and then the context layer, and then even potentially like a process layer from like the internal view of a company. So that's something that really, I think will be kind of a net new function, is really kind of understanding like how a person should flow through a company experience, and adding that as like context to the overall structure.
Mm-hmm. And I love that idea of the composable CDP in the sense that it scales as your data scales. Because if you're just sitting on top of your existing data infrastructure, there's never going to come a point where, I can't access this data point or this product usage signal or whatever that may be. I guess like a level of use cases that you can do in the data warehouse that you can't do anywhere else, because that's where you're building your propensity models and just all of these super nuanced things that is really impossible to do with any other technology.
Yeah. I think there's definitely a lot of benefit, especially when you have access to signals which you may not have originally thought of as like related to marketing use cases or customer experience use cases. And when you have kind of access to that rich downstream data, you can kind of figure out who a customer is past a marketing conversion point, and really kind of figure out, all right, what does this mean long-term for our company once we've acquired them? And like, are they becoming a retained customer? Are they, are you creating depth with them? And I think that's where the composable CDP really helps get access to that data.
You mentioned Nextdoor and kind of undergoing a pretty drastic shift there to this composable architecture. How did that come about? How did y'all align on a warehouse-centric approach? Like, what was some of the decision-making that ultimately led to that? And then also, any ripple effects of those decisions downstream, if you can talk to that.
So Nextdoor actually didn't have like a truly composable CDP architecture. Like we actually leveraged a traditional CDP architecture. And with our CDP, we started to enable some reverse ETL capabilities over time. So we were able to kind of pull data directly from our data lake and data warehouse and augment the profiles that were in the CDP. So we had kind of a ton of real-time streaming data coming through the CDP, and that was all events-based and happening instantaneously, more or less. And then every 24 hours, we would augment that data from a profile basis to kind of say, like, what can we gather from exactly what this business user or this consumer was doing on the platform, augment the profile there, and then create more advanced audiences in our CDP and then push them downstream to different media channels. So we kind of took a hybrid approach in that regard.
Yeah, which I think is great. We see a lot of companies do it. I think oftentimes in technology, it's an or conversation, and you have to use this, and you have to do this. And oftentimes it's an and, like tools working alongside each other.
Yeah, I think that's an interesting concept. As we approach kind of the AI operation side of things, I think a lot of companies that may have traditionally been a little bit more of like buy-centric organizations instead of build for like their MarTech stack, I think they'll be faced with a challenge of like saying, all right, maybe we actually can build a portion of this. And then we also have to figure out, are these AI agents additive to our overall MarTech stack, or will they potentially be duplicative of some of the tools? And then you're faced with the challenge of like, which ones do you deprecate over time? So I think we kind of have to look at like, over the next 12 to 18 months, I would say a lot of companies would be building agentic flows and layers to connect to the current SaaS platforms. But past that horizon, I do think you'll see a lot of SaaS platforms churn in favor of some of the more agentic platforms.
And you touched on this a minute earlier, but what do you see as the biggest unlock in marketing from an AI standpoint? Is it that decisioning brain? If I'm in MarTech or Lifecycle today, how should I even be thinking about AI? Like, where is the future headed?
We broke it up into like two work streams. One was, how do we use AI for our internal processes and to kind of really make our marketing team more efficient and like all of our operational teams. So that might be something as simple as like, helping with creative briefs or writing email copy or, coming up with imageries, taglines, whatever it might be. And then, going one step further and actually saying, all right, instead of just doing these discrete components, can the agent actually build out an entire workflow? So going from, let's say, creating the creative brief, then writing the email, then turning it into HTML, and then like uploading it into like a automation platform. So we wanted to kind of think through that entire flow. It was still very early on. So I think that's the internal side of things. And from the external side, it's really about, I think, turbocharging the concept of like next best action and the personalization side of things. So understanding like, all right, where is Luke in his actual buying cycle? What's his mindset? And taking into account where you might be across a marketing play, a sales play, and a customer service play. So thinking about the concept of like AI CX. So we want to really create a layer across all three of those groups and say, where are you with the organization? And how can we make this flow easy for you? So if you're running into a customer service issue, we might actually want to modulate down any of the marketing and sales efforts until that customer service issue is completed. And, so like we take into account like what you're going through and being able to do that at scale, I think is going to be pretty interesting.
Yeah. And it gets to this really interesting idea that we've been hearing a lot of marketing is a lot of decisions. You think about, you have all of these different channels, push notifications, SMS, email. You have all of these different things you could send the customer. And just like you said, you have, escalations and support that could be happening, or maybe you need to pause sends so that you're not sending someone an offer when they're trying to return an item they can't return. And trying to figure out how to do that on a one-to-one basis too. So you're not just treating everyone as, an audience. And one of the great examples is this image we have internally that I love, where we often think of, audiences and that everyone is the same. But the reality is audiences are made up of individuals. And, somebody who buys Nike shoes might be a runner. Another person might be buying a pair of them for, rehab or something. But in an audience, they're both going to look the same. They both just purchase Nike shoes. But AI can tell the difference between the two to figure out what that next best decision is and what is ultimately best for the customer.
Yeah. So there's a few things in there. One is, I think historically marketing was audience and cohort driven because that was a way of creating efficiency in the workflow. So like I couldn't, create a whole campaign just for Luke. I had to create a campaign for people that looked and acted like Luke. But now, with AI and kind of the scalability there, like I actually can create a campaign just for you. That being said, I think if companies were to adopt that 100% personalization for 100% of the people, that may not be the most efficient route. There might be a group of people like very high value customers. All right, they get a fully customized AI, one-to-one flow. And then there is sort of still the cohort group because you don't know how they're going to act. So I think there's going to be kind of a hybrid there, which could be kind of interesting to kind of bifurcate. The second thing around like decisioning is when we think about how AI will affect the external customers and the interaction there. I really see a lot of the tools starting to become like context inputs. And so if you were to run an A/B test or a holdout test, whatever it might be, that test shouldn't be really decided upon in isolation. That test data and output should go back into the context and feed your profile for Luke. And so saying, all right, he was exposed to this. He did really well on this, so what's his next best action and things like that. So having kind of that recurring or feedback loop is going to be really important to really create, a living AI decisioning engine.
Yeah. And I think this is one of the things that honestly we don't talk about enough in marketing is speed to learning is everything. The faster you can act on those insights. And when you're tying that together with your proprietary first party data, the things that you know about your customer that no one else knows, you kind of get to this flywheel effect where even if, maybe you send a message and it doesn't drive revenue for the business, there's an insight there for, okay, Luke didn't respond to this. And then you also apply that at like an aggregate level of, okay, people like Luke are likely to respond to this, or people like Luke didn't respond to this. Really the kind of the same technology that has existed in advertising in these walled gardens for years, but applying that to the broader landscape of marketing holistically is like really exciting.
Yeah. And I think like even playing it out a little further, one of the more exciting things I've been trying to wrap my head around is, all right, today, like my goal is to market to Luke, but in, a few days, months time, it may be, how do I market to Luke's AI agent? And knowing like how that agent is correlated to you from an identity graph perspective is going to be super interesting to put together. But also just, that agent will truly act as like an agent on your behalf. So they might have full access to your email and they know which brands you interact with and really like. And, like if you say, hey, to that agent, hey, I'm in market for a new pair of jeans. Can you find me this size and, get me a promo code or whatever? It'll go through your email, look in the open web, things like that. And, so I think all those end up being like context inputs. So your tests that you may run, they may have a very different time cycle because they end up becoming inputs to like an infinite LLM. So that could be quite interesting kind of to follow long term.
How do you think about evaluating technology vendors today, especially on a MarTech team where you have so many problems to solve, whether it be making sure the marketing team has access to the data points they need to run campaigns, and then obviously the KPIs that you're being measured on. How do you block out the noise from the signal?
So this was something that my team at Nextdoor, we had to adapt quite a bit. And when I started at Nextdoor like 4.5 years ago, our process for evaluating tech platforms was a pretty traditional process. We put together an RFP, we bring in, half a dozen companies to start to evaluate them. And then once we made our decision, we wouldn't go back to those companies, for like a year or so to kind of reevaluate them. And in most cases, we were signing longer term contracts because we wanted the price benefit, and we knew that the switching cost was high. That being said, we intentionally approached our stack with kind of a multi-brand approach. We always wanted best-in-class tools, and we wanted the ability to kind of plug and play things over time. What had changed over time was that as we started looking at AI tools, we realized that if we were to evaluate a tool today and it didn't fit our requirements, or it didn't meet kind of let's say the quality output that we're looking for, we would have to kind of leave that evaluation open and go back to it maybe next month. And the tool could be significantly stronger. So we couldn't necessarily count them out. And so what that ended up doing for us is it really created a bit of a different approach in terms of how we looked at our contracts. So in most cases, we had to narrow all of our contracts down to a year. And we started to think about this philosophy of just rip and replace. So we had to go in and say, if we were going to buy this AI tool, there was a over 50% chance that in 1 year's time, there would be something better in market that we had to replace it with. And then the other thing we started to approach is that it was almost impossible to pick a true winner in the AI tooling space today. So what we tried to do is take a portfolio approach. So we'd make a bet on maybe 2 tools, and we kind of pit them against each other, let the teams evaluate both at the same time, and kind of go from there. And there was a lot more POCs involved versus just saying, hey, we're going to sign this contract and go forward. So we did have to kind of see the proof in the pudding and, put them to a real world test. We essentially had to create a lot more flexibility in our approach of how we brought on tools and how we evaluated them. And we also had to change, some of our approaches in terms of how we looked at data governance and things like this. So we had to kind of flex to where the market was and really kind of make sure our team was as adaptable as possible.
Without giving away, the trade secrets of Nextdoor, I'm curious, how do you think about structuring a MarTech stack? What kind of tools and things are in there, especially in 2025?
Yeah, so this is a really good question. So I think I would almost say that a MarTech stack, a RevOps stack, customer success stack is the overall architecture of that is still going to be pretty similar, where for MarTech, we would have, a CDP as our core, composable CDP core. Then we would call that kind of our orchestration layer, sort of data signals coming in and out. Then we would have kind of a series of SaaS platforms for execution. So maybe that's an email platform. Maybe that's just getting data to a paid media platform, analytics layer. And then kind of a raw data layer. I think the new layer that we had in there was kind of the AI decisioning and orchestration, and then a secondary component, which was AI agents. And I approached kind of the AI operations stack as kind of 4 layers. You had kind of the AI interface. So this might be your main entry point. Maybe it's Gemini or something like that. The second behind that is your agentic layer. And this could be a combination of different agent platforms. Then you had kind of your SaaS layer, and then kind of your knowledge graph, and then your raw data layer. So that's how I kind of envision some of the stacks going forward. There'll be essentially new AI layers on top of your current SaaS infrastructure, if you will.
One of the things that's interesting about Nextdoor from a high level is I'm imagining a lot of y'all's personalization is very localization based, just with different neighborhoods and regions all over the place. And I'm imagining that presents a lot of challenges. And it's a challenge that a lot of brands face, is trying to figure out how to localize and personalize their content for specific region. Is there anything you can just share there of how to think about that, maybe kind of lessons you learned along the way?
Yeah, so actually a lot of that neighbor specific personalization was driven by our product team and their product notifications. But what they would do is kind of like leverage information from your neighborhood. And, Nextdoor has a substantial footprint in the US as well as 10 other countries. So they were able to kind of pull imagery, information around like what was trending in your neighborhood and things like that, and like add that to the email notifications that were going out. So that helped you feel like each of those emails was really quite unique to your specific area and a hyper local perspective. From the marketing perspective, what we tried to do from a personalization side of things is really take into account the information that you had given us about your business and give you more information around like how, let's say like you're a plumber, how other plumbers were utilizing the platform. So we tried to verticalize it that way. And then we also tried to personalize it based on where you were in your purchase journey on an advertising campaign. So like if you had just signed up and registered an account, we had an onboarding flow for that. If you had gotten, halfway through the purchase flow, but then abandoned, we had another campaign for that. So to kind of help you through whatever you might be facing. Yeah. So the personalization was different from like a B2C lens versus a B2B lens.
It's interesting because it, again, gets at that idea of orchestration. I think so often as marketers, we think that personalization is about how many tokens and variables you can insert into a message that you know about someone. And the example I love to use is if I go to Amazon and I abandon my cart and don't check out, I know I abandoned my cart. I don't need a message saying, hey, you left 2 items back in your cart. What I need is a reason to purchase. And the brands that do it really right, and I think Amazon is one of them, is, hey, there's only 2 left in stock, or order in the next 24 hours so it gets here in time for Christmas. And both of those messages are using the exact same event, the abandoned cart, but the message around the data is, behavioral based. It's trying to get at the psychology. And so much of marketing, it's informed by data, but then the messages need to be about how real humans behave, the psychological aspect.
Yeah, no, I think that's a perfect example. And this is an area where raw data plus context makes things more powerful. So let's say like the same Amazon example. Usually pretty early on in the season, we'll buy the kids' Lego advent calendars. And they usually tend to sell out way before November. So like if I had put it in my cart and Amazon had then sent me an email or a display ad saying, hey, the stock is quickly going down, or the price, may go up or something like that. Or sending me a message saying, like, in most cases, like these sell out on like November 1st. That would create like more urgency without them needing to offer me a discount. So knowing that it's an advent calendar, it's time specific for Christmas, it has to usually get there December 1st. All that kind of gets taken into account to create that sense of urgency, I think is incredibly powerful for them to know what the product is, what it means to you, and like, how you can create urgency. So the context is key there.
And it's hard for a marketer to be able to do that on a one-to-one basis. It gets back to what we were talking about earlier, is this is something that AI is really good at, just looking through all of this context and this data and being able to know, oh, this person has bought advent calendars the last 2 years in a row. There's a new advent calendar. And the other side, what you're talking about, of it gets back to those first party data signals of knowing, your inventory data, your how frequently things go out of stock. There's all of these other nuanced data points around the customer that are related to them to orchestrate personalization for them. But oftentimes we're just looking at, what we know about the customer versus the actual value we're delivering. I want to double back really quick. We were talking about those kind of nuanced data points that companies can use to really deliver these super personalized experience, or think about how the way they orchestrate messages. Was there anything at Nextdoor that stood out as like, y'all knew if a user took this action, those types of things, or just interesting insights that you wouldn't have thought that y'all learned?
Well, I think some of it was somewhat obvious in terms of like user behavior, where like if you had a small business owner come into the platform and first like claim their page. So that was kind of like their identity within Nextdoor. That was a strong signal that they were interested in being part of their neighborhood and establishing their presence. The companies that actually took time to like fill out their logo image, a few images of their business, their hours of operation, the description of the business, all that helped tremendously to make sure that they were truly interested in being part of the system long term. And that showed to have, a positive correlation in terms of like their willingness to buy advertising on the platform. So like the more depth of engagement you could drive, the better, the chances are you're going to get them to purchase something, and the higher chances that they were going to, be retained as a user.
So what is the best way you find then to back up to, you have these outcomes you care about as the business, and ultimately it all falls under revenue. But if you know that, okay, if we can get the user to fill out this information or view this thing, their propensity is slowly increasing to the point where they're monetizable. How do you communicate maybe that to leadership, or think about kind of that layered approach of driving the behaviors that drive the outcome you care about?
I would argue, and this is not Nextdoor specific, that what you're looking for, and most companies unfortunately report on, is like these very minute metrics. So they're looking at kind of like, let's say, daily active users, or like number of posts or number of purchases, whatever it might be. But in the grand scheme of things, what that ends up being is a proxy for that customer's impression or of your brand, and like their willingness to do business with you. And behind that, it's also a proxy for, is your brand easy to work with? And I think we don't necessarily spend enough time talking about, all right, have these new features that I launched, or has this new product that I launched, does it make my customer's life easier to interact with my brand? And does that give a better, sense of like, does it drive more value for the customer now? Then, we're constantly forced back into like just price to drive frequency and things like that. And I think it's a fluffy metric, but I think it's something we should probably try to add a little bit more rigor around. Is like, are we keeping our customers happy? Are we giving them what I would call like the ideal customer outcome? And are we making that as quick and as efficient as possible? In a lot of cases in marketing, we talk about the ideal customer profile, and like, okay, that's great. Like I've defined who Luke is, but like I haven't defined like what a good experience for Luke is.
Yeah.
And once we start to get to ICP plus an ICO, then I think we start to really unlock some really cool use cases.
It's so true too, because I don't know about you, but there's just, a few specific brands that come to mind. I really like, I don't pay attention to their emails. I don't even think about their brand, but when I need to go buy this thing, that is where I go, just top of mind. And it's always tailored to the experience that I've had as a customer. And it has nothing to do with their marketing, but only to do with my product experience, in the sense that I've never had a Mac or a phone blue screen and the same as a Windows device. So that's just something that's always top of mind. Is every device I've ever purchased from Apple has lasted and lasted and lasted and lasted and lasted. I have these old AirPods, and they just go and go and go and go. So for me, it's like, I like to spend my money one time. And
so, I mean, and what Apple did is they made it easy for you not to have to purchase again.
Mm-hmm.
And they gave you a quality product, right? And like, to me, that's the biggest value proposition. Like they gave you something that was worthwhile.
And maybe, that's going to be different for each person, but I'm realizing as you say that, that's what I care about, is not having to spend my money twice. It's a D2C brand. I'm really tall, 6'7", so I can't buy clothes at normal places because I wash them one time and they shrink. And I don't like wasting money. So there's this D2C brand called American Tall, and the clothes are a little more expensive, but they're really high quality and they fit, and I can wash them, and I have clothes. So that's interesting. You're making me realize, why I buy is I like to get usage out of the product and not have to buy it again shortly after.
Yeah. I mean, if you think about like the email messages that American Tall may have sent you, like, have they ever once emphasized the fact that like you can watch our stuff 100 times and it won't shrink?
Probably they have. Hey, I haven't looked in a while. Truthfully, they usually get me with some sales.
Yeah. Yeah. But I mean, like, but the sales at this point are just creating a little bit of urgency because you already know their value proposition. A, it fits.
Exactly.
B, it's quality. And C, it doesn't shrink.
I'm already going to buy from them for my clothes. So yeah, that point is so true. Okay, do you have everyone's experimenting, talking about AI. I'm curious, in your time at Nextdoor today, what's a practical, non-hyped example of a use case, even a prompt that made your life just way easier?
Yeah. So like one of the AI use cases that we implemented at Nextdoor, which had like the highest adoption, was we built an agent on a platform called Glean that really just helped you prepare for your one-on-ones with your manager. And it sounds like ridiculously simple, but what it did was it helped people save a ton of time going into that meeting. And it also, what it did, it looked at your calendar, it looked at your Slack, you may have looked at your Jira, and all the work you had done during the course of the week, quickly summarized it into the format that your manager preferred, and then said, all right, here's the agenda for this meeting. It sent it to them in a Google Doc. And, in a lot of cases, some of the managers realized they're like, all right, this is the information I need. We actually don't need to have the one-on-one because you've kept me up to date on all the stuff. So it actually reduced the amount of time for prep, reduced the amount of time for like actual meetings. And then coming out of that meeting, we built another agent that would just take your notes and summarize them into action items and, create tasks for you and things like that. So we wanted to get rid of some of the bookend processes. And that ended up being like a pretty easy win for every department. And it was something easy and approachable for a lot of people in the company to just like test and use AI. So it wasn't marketing specific, but part of what we're solving for is just getting people comfortable with AI in general, not necessarily,
And it's if you are able to cut time down and trim this somewhere else, it is going to be marketing specific because then you have more time to not spend prepping for a one-on-one.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, the one-on-ones are helpful, but they are overhead.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, there's always a cost to everything. Okay,
Exactly.
What about just personally? I'm always curious just to hear how people are using GPT or any of these LLMs. Do you have a preference? Is there kind of something fun you've found that you wouldn't have thought to do? I'll give you an example for myself. I pretty much only use GPT when I'm cooking now for recipes.
Oh, interesting.
And
okay,
it's really good.
Yeah, we've done that as well. Like I'll ask it for like a 5-day meal plan, and then break that down into a grocery list. But then, my hope is to kind of just have it buy the grocery list for me. But yeah, I do spend a lot of time with sort of Gemini Nano Banana and my youngest son, just to kind of help explore like a creative side of him and, like just come up with a crazy idea of like a toy that you could imagine. And we start just thinking and asking Google to come up with this. And like the images are phenomenal. And I think it's a good way for him to start to learn how to express his thoughts, but then see them come to life immediately.
Yeah.
So it's a great way to kind of create conversation, I think, just in the family. So
yeah, there's such an unblocker to creativity, especially to even visualize what's in your mind. And just me as a non-technical marketer, being able to just, even if it's really bare bones, but type out my idea and have just a wireframe generated.
Yeah.
And see that of like, hey, what would this flow look like, or how would this product work if we wanted to do this? It's a really good way to vet between kind of good and bad.
Definitely. And, I think, if you asked me a year ago, if I had to look up something like, let's say like fixing my bike, I'd go to YouTube and kind of watch a video. Now, like I'll pull out Gemini Live and just like show it the component which I'm having an issue with on my bike, and it tells me, all right, like turn this screw or like adjust this thing. And like in real time, it's like having, this professional mechanic with you at all times. So
I'm constantly
it's
troubleshooting and putting screenshots into these if there's something I don't know how to do. I love that.
Yeah.
One of the things we're hearing a lot is just every marketing team wants to execute on smarter marketing, and they want to do more personalized campaigns. I guess kind of two pillars of this question. One, what does smarter marketing look like? And what is the biggest blocker to executing on that?
I would say smarter marketing, in my opinion, is really going deep on like your ideal customer outcome and that ICO concept. So figuring out like what does your customer actually want from the marketing messages that they're going to receive. It's not always saying like, all right, let's run our traditional acquisition or onboarding or retention campaign, blah blah blah. So I think one of the biggest challenges with trying to approach smarter marketing is setting expectations with the management team that you may actually lower volume, and you might have to shift which metrics you prioritize. And I think that's, a hard pill for a lot of organizations to swallow at the moment, where they say like smarter marketing just means more volume, more personalization, like more variations, more tests. And it's like more is not always the answer.
Yeah. What does the customer need right now? Which fundamentally that sounds more like an alignment problem of just what does success look like in the company.
It could be a combination of like, did your NPS score improve? Or like if you sent out a bunch of surveys and were the results significantly better because you modulated your volume down and things like that. So I think there's metrics which we would have considered secondary that are going to be like the better bellwether going forward.
Is there anything you'd want to shout out? I don't know. What are you excited about next? Where can people find you if they want to talk?
Yeah, definitely. I appreciate people who reach out on LinkedIn and want to connect there. I'd love to talk about kind of the concept of AI operations and how organizations need to kind of build that function and capability. And I'd love to talk to anyone that really is on the forefront of building new agentic layers, orchestration layers, governance layers, and really kind of the next generation of marketing. So if anyone's out there and wants to talk about that, I'm always available to chat.
I love it. Well, thank you so much. It has been wonderful.